Every time I come into contact with an MCS resit student and I ask them some basic questions about the previous pre-scene, the one relevant to their exam, their knowledge is sketchy. And yet that's when most of these students say to me, well, I read the pre-scene 20, 30, 40 times. This is unusual. We have to know the basics. Welcome everybody to the introduction to company. The purpose of this video is to outline really 10 key areas that we must have a grip on now, very, very quickly. These are the basics of the pre-scene, the important points that I've picked out. In essence, when you look at a pre-scene, and indeed when I look at it and study it, I'm thinking about questions. I'm thinking about who, what, when, where, why, and how. And in this first section, Intro to Company, as mentioned, we're going to talk about those questions and really pull out from that fairly significant document the key elements relating to our MCS case for November 22 and February 23, Happy Playz. So let's start now. What are the key points that I have picked out? I think the first question is really, number one, what? What do we have here? Well, we have a successful listed entity based in a country called Wistaria that really sells three main things: toys, video games, and kids' bikes. Established in 1992, they operate basically through retail shops and indeed through their own website. Let's note that they don't manufacture toys or video games or indeed kids' bikes as such. They, broadly speaking, act as an agent. They buy in and indeed sell on. So that's the first point. I guess the second point is who? The founders. Now we see from the pre-scene that the first shop was opened in Wistaria's Hope City by the founders in 1992. And indeed, we're not given any details on the original founders, but what we do know is they must have been quite smart, because bear in mind they're acting in a sort of an agency capacity in the early 90s and not manufacturing their own products. They had to focus on something to be different, to differentiate themselves from other companies and indeed from toy manufacturers themselves. So what did they do? Well, they basically focused in on merchandising and promotion. For example, within their shops, they used vibrant color schemes. They selected only the main popular brands and indeed a wide range of popular brands, and they tried to sell and did sell those brands at lower prices than competitors, or prices very similar to the lowest price competitors. Now, these founders have since exited pretty quickly, I would add. 2004, when the listing took place, they sold out, and I would suggest that they're probably no longer involved with the company. That's point number two. How about point number three? Well, I've touched on already, the business model. How has this company, in a fairly short space of time, grown to be one of the market leaders in the country of Wistaria in this particular area of the toy industry? Well, it seems to me that their business model is based on three main parts. The first area is that they buy in popular brands and they compete on price. Okay, so they have buyers who scour the market, contact manufacturers, and keep their eyes open as to what is the latest brand, what are people going to buy in the next 6, 12 months, etc. The second part of their business model is that they sell those products from out-of-town retail parks, not from central, in-town shops or retail outlets. Why do they do that? What's the popularity? Well, we're told within the pre-scene that several things attract consumers to these out-of-town parks. The first is parking, or ease of parking. The second is ease of access, for example, road networks, motorways, etc. And broadly speaking, the third one is popularity. In other words, there will be other facilities at these retail parks. For example, clothes shops, for example, restaurants. So perhaps it's a bit of an experience. Maybe you have done that. Maybe you do that regularly. Go to a retail park and go shopping, have lunch, etc., etc. Okay. The third key area, and I think this is very important with this particular pre-scene, is that within their business model, it seems to me that the way in which they have differentiated themselves from the competitors and become so successful is their expertise in merchandising. Now, when you think merchandising, for the moment, let's just basically think presentation. In other words, the presentation of these products in the retail outlets that they run. More of that later. So that's point number 3. Let's move on to point number 1, their operations. I mean, broadly speaking, I guess they're a retail operation, aren't they? They have a number of retail shops. On top of that, obviously, they have, as mentioned within the pre-scene, their website. Okay, so their operations are basically 3-part. They have 120 retail shops, and within those shops, they have 6,500 staff. That's a lot of staff. More of that later. These shops are spread wide across the country of Wistaria. It appears that they do not have, note, any retail outlets outside of the country of Wistaria. Second in is their head office, where I guess you would be based as a financial manager. 140 staff, and that's based in Central City in Wistaria. And then the third area is warehouse or warehousing. Bearing in mind they're effectively acting as an agent, they have a warehouse right beside head office in Central City, and indeed 240 staff to equip and indeed operate that warehouse. So overall, 6,880 staff in their whole organization. That's quite a lot. Now, moving on from there, I've said that they're successful. How successful are they? Well, in the most recent published financials, this is the year ended 31st of the 12th, 2021, they have revenues in Westarian dollars 906 million, and that's an increase year on year. They have gross profit of 271 million, again an increase year on year. And then they have PBT, or profit before tax, of around about 77 million, again an increase year on year. In terms of their net asset base, 275 million per the balance sheet, and just as an add-on, a very, very significant dividend issued in this year of 75 million. That makes a DPR, or dividend payout ratio, of 96%. So obviously a fair amount of pressure on the company and indeed the board to return to shareholders. So that's point number 5. Let's deal with the sales or the revenues. Where do they come from? Point number 6. Well, as mentioned, in terms of total revenue in the most recent year to December 21, 906 million Westarian dollars. Now let's note there is reference, and I will come to them during the course, there is reference to a competitor, in other words, the biggest player in the Westarian market, a company called Glee Till. Now note that their revenues are virtually exactly 50% higher than Happy Playz at 1359.6 million. But 900 million is nothing to be sniffed at. Okay? Now, in terms of the split of that 900 million, what do they sell? I've said up top in point number 1, they sell 3 main things. The biggest thing that they sell is traditional toys. That is 781 million or thereabouts, around about 86% of their total revenues. The video games come in next, 93.8 million, so around about 10% or thereabouts. And then the bikes, 31.3 million or 4%. So basically their revenues are split three ways. And note that their operating profit in terms of the percentage split is broadly the same as the percentages that I've just outlined for revenue. Okay, that's point number 6. Let's move on to point number 7. I've touched on the founders. I've said that obviously as of listing in 2004, they exited after 12 years. Who runs this company? Well, we obviously have the board and indeed the management. It is a listed entity. We have at the top our CEO, Magdalena Potica. Okay. Along with Magdalena, we have 4 executive directors across the 4 main heads that you would expect: marketing, operations, finance, and HR. Now, we're not given any detail in relation to these executive directors. What I mean is background, experience, etc. But that's not unusual within an MCS pre-scene. Okay? Now, other than the executive board, we have the non-executive side. We have the non-executive chair, in fact, Michael Anderson. And on top of that, we have 4 NEDs, 4 non-executive directors. Now, again, no detail whatsoever. Now, quick point here. Is corporate governance a topic area that we should be concerned about or worried about? Probably not, because it's rarely examined at the MCS level, and it's not a significant area within the management level syllabus. More of that later on in the course. Okay? So that's point number 7. How about point number 8? Ownership. Who owns this company? We can see clearly it's a listed entity. It's recognized on the West Island Stock Exchange, incorporated in 1992, listed 2004. Now, what do we know about this particular country first? Well, we're told that it has a strong, developed economy, and indeed that the population is pretty affluent. I think we can broadly assume that this is a sort of a Western European, Central European type country, type economy. So in terms of the ownership with this listed entity, I would say ballpark, you're looking at sort of institutional investors around about 30 to 40%. Second area would be your sort of free floaters, Joe Public, you, me, other people holding individual shareholdings, maybe around about 30% or slightly less. And then over and above that, third main group would be sort of private companies, companies and indeed government or public government bodies, around about 20%. So in terms of the ownership, probably around about a 3-way split there. Now, in terms of the issued share capital, we have issued at 100 million Westarian dollars, and it's share capital plus share premium. We don't know the split on share premium as such. Note also in this area of ownership, something that is a little bit unusual, I think, with this particular pre-scene is that there are no borrowings whatsoever. Normally within an MCS pre-scene, you will see obviously the capitalization, but you also see borrowings of some kind. Now, what does that tell us? Well, I think it tells us that there are room for borrowings. This is a successful company. It's a growing company in a growing market. Let's think about sources of finance, pluses and minuses with each one, and indeed how the introduction of finance, whether it's borrowings or anything else, would affect the balance sheet. Let's think about the management level syllabus in that area. More on that later. So that's point number 8. Let's move on to point number 9. Now, I sometimes include this area and sometimes I don't. It depends on the pre-scene. This area is the key points from the press reports. The reason I've included it this time is that there's quite a lot of them. There's 5 in all. Yeah, that's quite unusual. Normally 3 or 4, 5, unusual to have it. I've seen it before, but I thought for the sake of this intro, let's include 3 areas that I picked out from the press reports that I think are important, and I will be referring to these areas throughout the course. Okay, the first one is in relation to the press release on the retail parks. In effect, I guess what they're saying within that is that, being a part of a retail park can make or break you. In other words, yes, you can have a good system, a good business model, etc., but your dependent upon footfall, yeah, at that retail park. So, consumers, let's note, they're fickle. Fads come and go, trends come and go. An example of that would be something that 20 years ago you might have seen at a retail park. You don't see so much now. White goods, electrical goods, because there's a preference really now, from around about 2010 onwards to purchase those online, probably because of pricing. Okay, so first key point is the fact that they operate from within retail parks. For me, is great if you've got the footfall. Not so great if you haven't. There's nothing worse I find than going somewhere, a shopping center, a retail park, where you have closed retail outlets. Puts me off. Okay, so that's the first key point, dependency. The second key point is in relation to the press release on merchandising. Yeah, and for me, as mentioned earlier on, this is certainly the key to competitive advantage for a business like this. You get this wrong, you're in trouble. You get it right, yeah, happy days. In essence, what I said previously is that merchandising means that when you walk into the store, how are you impacted upon by the way in which those products, toys, bikes, etc. are presented to you? I think that when we think about supermarkets, for example, they're the experts, aren't they, in merchandising, and we buy things without knowing them. Okay? The third key point from the press report area is really a short one. It's this loyalty card. They put in one press release on this area of the launch of Happy Playz loyalty card. And it's quite a nice touch really for consumers because it's 1 for 1. In other words, 1 club point for spending 1 Westarian dollar. That's quite a good deal as far as I can see. So again, I'll be referring back to these loyalty cards throughout the course because I think that's a nice little topic area. Okay, now talking of topic areas, point number 10, my final point in this intro to company, and indeed thanks for sticking with me so far. I hope it's all making sense. What I've done here is I've just picked out 3 key areas, 3 topic areas. Call these my gut instinct topics that sort of come to me based on the initial work that I've done in this particular precinct. I'm thinking of styles and types of tasks within the MCS exam. The first obvious one with a company that's involved within the toy industry has to be health and safety. In other words, health and safety for the consumers. A large proportion of their products are sold to young children. So in this area of health and safety, I'm linking it to their responsibility, corporate social responsibility, and indeed over and above that, ethics. So this area of health and safety, we know that's an element of CIMA E2, as is this whole area of employers and indeed businesses being responsible not just to their consumers and their customers, but to all stakeholders. Let's be up on that area, and please do watch out for the CSR and ethics video later on in the course. The second topic area that I've picked out, again, is a fairly obvious one. You may have spotted this. For me, it's the area of HR and staff. This is a company with a massive amount of staff, and it'd be so easy for the examiner to bring in those areas that we see within the management level syllabus, for example, leadership theories, for example, management theories, or possibly something in the area of performance, in brackets, incentives to staffs, styles of incentive, etc. Okay, so that's my second one. The third one is, I guess, linked into their business model, and it's one that I think is, again, very relevant, perhaps even as important as the whole area of merchandising in these retail outlets. It's the idea of pricing, and indeed the importance of getting the price right. Let's bear in mind that they're working on margins here. They're buying in popular brands and more generic brands, perhaps less popular, but they're trying to price them right to attract consumers. And we know certainly from our management level studies and indeed P2, this whole area of pricing is important. Which approach would you take? Would you take a cost-based approach? What does that mean? Would you take a market-based approach? What does that mean? We should be familiar with all the terms associated with pricing. For example, price skimming, etc., etc. Okay? So really that's my 10 key points for you in relation to your MCS case. As mentioned, we have summary notes at the end of each section. Do check on the summary notes. Get familiar with the key points that are raised video to video, with this being your first one. Okay, thank you for listening. Please do join me shortly for the intro to industry video. Good luck with your studies. Let's work hard and pass this exam together. Many thanks.